Once it was God who pulled the rope and carried humanity. The latter only had to go along with God and make sure it followed him. But, as if this endeavor did not suit man, he rebelled and removed God. Now it came that man himself was to pull the rope, but once he was set to move forward, he suddenly realized frightfully, but what is the path? The path quickly became many paths and many ways towards uncharted territory. Uncharted it was, for in the craze and tumult of existence man came to carry a decrepit soul, worn out from the endless voyages to the beyond. An attempt to reach a zenith, he quickly came to bemoan his destiny and, quite hopelessly, bask under the sunlight of despair. It is this ambivalence, resulting from man's removal of its anchor in God, that he came to bring meaning into his existence, however superficial and unjustifiable. And two prominent worldviews emerge from the ashes of the dead God: secular materialism and nihilism. Since the detachment of the earth from the sun is proclaimed by Nietzsche, man had to find a way to pick up the pieces from the death of metaphysics in order to build new building blocks without any notion of a deity. What was to propel humanity was its self assertion, its imposition of its will on the world. We live in a world where the meaning for most people is self indulgence. It is the gratification of one's desires that is the new summum bonum of modernity. This is not to say that this practice was not present in the ancient world or the medieval world for that matter. What changed was the scale. While in the past it was the aristocracy who were the privileged ones, the ones who could afford to live lavishly, now in today's world, whether one is poor or rich, he or she is programmed by society to be a consumer, to buy things which most of the time one does not need. One is bombarded by billboards which promote the newest trends in the fashion industry, the latest movies, the latest controversies, discounts for travel, and so on. This is the new iconography of modernity. Whereas a religious person, if let's say an Eastern Orthodox, enters a church, stands before an icon and venerates it by kissing it, modern secular people use Instagram and Facebook, where by posting their pictures they await tumultuously and are swept by a craze for likes, where the more they get, the more they find meaning and assurance of themselves. No wonder that many today suffer from a lack of meaning, where teenage suicide has skyrocketed in the last decades, partly because one's meaning has come to resemble the virtual likes of his or her profile picture. One could say that today's society is even more iconographic. The need for the visual and aesthetic has not ceased, but has burst out in uncontrollable ways. Whereas in the past it was the saints that were venerated, now it is the Instagram models, influencers, and TikTokers who to a person try to influence the public. The place of worship is also deeply embedded in man. While for many secular people a church building would be out of question, resembling a dull and dead atmosphere void of any escapade, many have instead replaced the latter with a shopping mall, the football stadium, the entertainment park, and other places. If we take the football stadium, for example, we have a type of structure which in many ways resembles a temple. Like the temple, the stadium has a place which is the most sacred, which then expands outside but becomes less sacred. The football field represents the Holy of Holies, the altar, the place of sacrifice. It is here that only the football players can come and play their game. Immediately next to the field are the stands filled with the fans. Here the fans represent the community of believers who, like the football fans, are actively involved in the religious procession game of football. In temple terms, this is the inner courtyard. There is a third layer, and this one is the least sacred. This place is outside the stadium and can represent the space where situated are the shops for merchandise or the ticket shops selling tickets for a given game. This closely resembles the place outside the temple, where you had sellers who would sell animals for sacrifice. The above example can show us that today's world is in no way any less sacred than, let's say, 500 years ago. One can say that the football stadium today is a modern day temple with a modern day liturgy. For James K.A. Smith, to be human is to be a liturgical animal. Most of the liturgies in which the average secular man and woman are involved are unconscious. Even so, we have a conflict, a struggle between liturgies, the Christian one and the secular one. With everyone having a liturgy, it means that everyone worships a particular thing. Many expressions conceptualize this idea. For Smith, we are what we worship, or similarly, what we love. The Bible is filled with imagery which resembles the latter. For example, in Psalm 115, verse 8, the psalmist speaks about those who create idols, saying, "Those who make them will be like them, and so will all who trust in them." Furthermore, in Exodus, we are witnesses of Israel's betrayal immediately after God had delivered them from the Egyptians. Their betrayal or shift in worship is when they make a golden calf. Later, when Israel was described in negative terms, the Bible speaks of them as stiff-necked. Further down the line, the prophet Hosea remarks how Israel is stubborn like a calf, which most likely alludes to the golden calf episode in Exodus. All of this points to the fact that Israel had become like the calf they had created, which eventuated in them adopting a non-human bestial nature. Charles Taylor contributes significantly to this area when describing one's identity. For him, having an identity is doing something. Everyone strives towards something, towards a good, and cannot simply avoid being in such a framework. Thus, we worship the good, depending on what it is, by having a framework which serves as our lens and also defines our meaning. Ever since the dawn of the Protestant Reformation, the focus, by then communal, became individualistic. Everyone now became an autonomous individual who individually got saved. This was a massive shift, for before it was the community that made the believer rather than the believer making the community. This was a direct result of the nominalist idea, as espoused by Occam, that there is nothing beyond the individual thing. No wonder that one is saved autonomously, in the Protestant sense, for there is no interrelation or ontological connection between individuals. A community as such does not exist, for it is just a construct. It is not a universal. Also, what held the community together in the Catholic sense was by the partaking of the sacraments, namely the Eucharist, from which one received the necessary grace to help him or her on the path of ongoing justification. A similar point, but entirely from a different angle, was made by the famous French philosopher Georges Bataille. Not in any way sympathetic towards Christianity, he made quite an intriguing remark on the nature of eroticism and sacrifice. In his book Eroticism, he spoke about human beings as discontinuous beings. By this, he simply meant that every single individual is different from the other, has experiences unique to him or herself, and is essentially separated from the other because of this. His insight comes when he speaks of sacrifice as a source of continuity in which human beings engage. Here, by continuity, it can simply mean the deep connection which every human strives for. Bataille states the following on sacrifice: the victim dies, and the spectators share in what his death reveals. This is what the religious historians call the sacramental element. The sacramental element is the revelation of continuity through the death of a discontinuous being to those who watch as a solemn rite. A violent death disrupts the creature's discontinuity. What remains, what the tense onlookers experience in the succeeding silence, is the continuity of all existence with which the victim is now one. If interpreted through a Catholic lens, the Mass in this instance serves as the means by which the continuity of being is maintained, and by this the community. For the modern secular mind, it is all about the maximization of one's well-being. It is no shock then that the prevalent view of today is that of atomism, which one can say is the direct offspring of nominalist thinking. Thus, secular society is inhabited by the atomic individual who finds meaning in keeping his atomic self independent and gratified. As noted by one of the main characters in the movie Fight Club, Tyler Durden, men in today's society suffer from a lack of meaning which society has lied to by pushing the belief that everyone can be a movie star, a rock star, or a celebrity. It is this propaganda from the society that tries to make everyone a narcissist, a self reliant unit whose priorities always must be them, the individual instead of the other. But how far can one live in such a condition? Many have chosen the path of nihilism. Seeing the preposterous nature of the world, its invariable lack of sacredness and telos has led many to conclude that life in all its forms is meaningless. The longing for God is now being turned into a longing for death. People like Thomas Ligotti in his book The Conspiracy Against the Human Race opted for such a position by suggesting to his readers that consciousness itself was the very doom that struck mankind when the latter, through the evolutionary process, became conscious of itself and its environment. It is consciousness for him that made man think that there is something to be done, somewhere to go, and a meaningful life to be strived for. All of this was but an illusion, made real by our consciousness. The damage has already been done. It seems that society is long gone, that there is no going back to the time when all society was governed by Christian principles rooted in the triune God. What a Christian can do is not repeat the mistakes done in the past by the disenchantment of the world, and thus open the floodgates of secular materialism and atheism. It is by elevating our awareness of the seriousness of sacramental life that one can truly begin to see a change in one's society. One's task is first and foremost to be rather than to do. It is by contemplating the divine, the order of being in the cosmos, that one becomes like it. The Christian must reject any notion of nominalism and return to the ancient Christian practice of theosis, the participation in God. It is through the process of deification that one achieves his true meaning, which is becoming like God. The way to tackle secularism is not by adopting another form of individualism like that in Protestantism, but acknowledge that the Christian way is one of relationship between man and God, which fundamentally cannot be achieved if one does not adopt the view of realism. One achieves union with God by first having a real connection with the latter. If there is not a real connection, a real ontology present, then what man is left with is a blind faith, stripped of its essence and therefore stripped of its source, which results in lifelessness, confusion, and eventually materialism.